March 18, 1987, 3:47 a.m. Gianni Russo staggered through the emergency room doors of Desert Springs Hospital in Las Vegas, his shirt soaked in blood, his face a canvas of bruises and cuts. 81 stitches later, he would learn that the man he had killed in self-defense wasn't just any street thug. He was Pablo Escobar's personal hitman. The fight had started over a poker game at the Mirage's private high-stakes room. Russo had been on a winning streak that night, up nearly $40,000 against some of the most dangerous players in Las Vegas. The private room was where serious money changed hands, where casino rules bent to accommodate players who wagered more in a single hand than most people made in a year. The Colombian had been losing consistently all evening, his frustration building with each hand. The man's paranoia had been escalating, fueled by frequent trips to the restroom and increasingly erratic betting patterns. "You're counting cards," the Colombian had accused, his thick accent making the words sound like a death sentence. "Nobody gets that lucky without cheating. You think because you're in movies, you're untouchable?" The man had snarled, his hand moving toward his jacket. "In my country, we make different kinds of movies, ones that don't have happy endings." The room had gone deadly quiet. Other players backed away from the table, sensing the violence that was about to explode. When the Colombian reached for his gun, Russo's survival instincts kicked in. The brass knuckles he'd carried since he was 16 connected with the man's temple with a sickening crack. The Colombian went down hard, his head hitting the marble floor with a sound Russo would never forget. Blood pooled around the man's skull as his body convulsed once, then went still. In the sudden silence, Russo could hear his own heart pounding and the distant sound of slot machines from the main casino floor. The casino's security team moved quickly to contain the situation. Within minutes, the high-stakes room was cleared, surveillance footage was confiscated, and the man's body was quietly removed through a service entrance. As Russo sat in that hospital bed hours later, watching the sunrise through the window, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The man's jacket had fallen open during the struggle, revealing not just the gun, but a small medallion with Pablo Escobar's face on it. 3 days later, Russo returned home to find his entire living room, carpet covered in a grotesque display that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Santeria ritual objects were arranged in precise patterns across his floor. Chicken bones formed intricate geometric shapes around 13 black candles that had been burned down to stubs. But what made Russo's blood run cold were the photographs of his children scattered among salamanders that had been positioned as if crawling toward the pictures. The arrangement was methodical, almost artistic in its precision. Someone had spent hours in his house, moving through his most private spaces, touching his family photos, learning every detail of his life. Red powder, what looked like dried blood mixed with herbs, formed circles around each photograph. There were pictures of his 7-year-old son and 9-year-old daughter, but it wasn't just family photos. There were images of his children's school, their playgrounds, their friends' houses, even photos from recent school events he didn't remember anyone taking. The message was unmistakable. We know where they are. We know their routines. We can reach them any time. Russo's hands trembled as he picked up one of the photos. It was his daughter Jessica at her ballet recital from just 2 weeks ago. How had they gotten this? Who had been watching his family? Detective Frank Coots arrived within 20 minutes, took one look at the scene, and immediately stepped back. "Jesus Christ," Coots muttered. "I've seen drug war messages before, but this is something else entirely." The detective contacted a cultural anthropologist at the University of Nevada. Dr. Elena Rodriguez arrived an hour later, examined the arrangement with growing concern. "This is a death sentence," Dr. Rodriguez explained, her voice grave. "In Santeria tradition, this specific arrangement means they're going to kill your pets first, then your children, then your neighbors, and finally you. But it's not just about death, it's about psychological torture. They want you to know exactly what's coming and in what order. The Colombian cartel hadn't just marked him for execution. They had declared war on everything he loved, and they wanted him to know they had unlimited access to the people he cared about most. That night, Russo booked a flight to New York. There was only one person who might be able to help him, even though that person had hated him since they were teenagers: John Joseph Gotti Jr. The history between them went back 35 years to East New York. They had grown up 3 blocks apart until their paths diverged. While Russo discovered acting, Gotti chose professional crime. When The Godfather made Russo famous, Gotti felt personally slighted. The Ravenite Social Club at 24/7 Mulberry Street had been Gambino family headquarters for over a decade. When Russo walked in on March 21st, every conversation stopped. Gotti was holding court at his usual table, wearing an immaculate suit. When he saw Russo approaching, a cold smile crossed his face. "Look who's here," Gotti announced. "The movie star who thinks he's a real killer." "John, I need to talk to you," Russo said. "Oh, now you need to talk to me," Gotti laughed. "When you were making your little movies, playing pretend gangster, you didn't need to talk to me then." "John, please," Russo said, sitting down. "They put a Santeria curse in my house. Photos of my kids." Gotti's expression shifted. "You killed one of Pablo's boys, Tommy. You know what that means? It means I'm a dead man." "No," Gotti said. "It means you're worse than dead. Pablo doesn't just kill people who cross him. He destroys them. Their families, their friends. That's why I'm here," Russo said desperately. "I need your help." Gotti studied Russo with cold calculation. "You forgot where you came from. You forgot that movie gangsters and real gangsters live in different worlds." For 30 seconds, Gotti said nothing. "But maybe it's time you learned the difference." "You want my help?" "Yes. You want me to stick my neck out for you?" "John, my kids." "Your kids are your problem, Tommy. You made this mess. You clean it up. But there is one option." "Anything," Russo said. "You go see Pablo yourself." What Russo didn't understand was that John Gotti had been waiting for an opportunity exactly like this one for over 2 years. The cocaine trade had exploded in New York during the 1980s, generating billions for Colombian cartels while traditional Italian families watched from the sidelines. Paul Castellano had forbidden drug dealing among family members, believing it would bring federal attention. But Gotti had been watching younger wise guys making millions with Colombian suppliers independently. The problem was establishing trust between 2 different criminal cultures. Colombians viewed Italians as old-fashioned. Italians saw Colombians as reckless. Previous partnership attempts had failed because neither side understood the other. What Gotti needed was someone who could speak to Pablo as an equal, who had nothing to do with traditional organized crime, but who could deliver a message. Someone desperate enough to take enormous risk, but valuable enough that his survival would demonstrate good faith. Someone like Gianni Russo. The beauty of Gotti's plan lay in its simplicity. Russo would approach Pablo not as a Gambino representative, but as an independent actor seeking to resolve a personal conflict. If Pablo killed him, Gotti would know the Colombians weren't interested in respectful business relationships. If Pablo spared him, it would open a secure channel for future communication. 2 weeks later, Russo found himself on a private jet bound for Bogotá. The arrangements had been made through Cuban exiles with connections to both Colombian cartels and the Gambino organization. All Russo knew was that John Gotti had kept his word. A meeting had been arranged. The 8-hour flight gave him too much time to think. He replayed every conversation with Gotti, searching for signs that this was more than a death sentence disguised as diplomacy. The plane touched down at El Dorado International Airport at 3:30 p.m. Russo was met by 2 men in expensive suits who spoke perfect English but showed no emotion whatsoever. They escorted him to a black Mercedes sedan with windows so heavily tinted they seemed opaque. The drive through Bogotá revealed a city at war with itself. Military checkpoints appeared every few miles. Soldiers with automatic weapons examining documents with nervous efficiency. Burned-out vehicles lined certain streets like monuments to violence. Buildings bore the scars of bombings and firefights. Clear testimony to Pablo Escobar's ongoing conflict with the Colombian government and rival cartels. After 3 hours of driving through increasingly desolate countryside dotted with coca fields that stretched to the horizon like green oceans of future powder, they arrived at Pablo's sprawling estate. The compound was like something from a narcotics fantasy, a massive colonial mansion surrounded by manicured gardens, tennis courts, a private airstrip, and what appeared to be a small zoo complete with exotic animals. Armed guards, with military-grade weapons, patrolled the perimeter with the disciplined efficiency of professional soldiers. Russo was escorted into a luxurious sitting room, decorated with priceless pre-Columbian artifacts and modern European furniture. Crystal chandeliers hung from hand-painted ceilings. The walls were lined with books in multiple languages, suggesting an intellect far more sophisticated than the typical criminal stereotype. He was told to wait. For 3 hours he sat alone in that opulent room, contemplating his fate and trying to prepare for what might be his final conversation. Every sound from outside made him tense. Footsteps in distant corridors, car engines, voices speaking rapid Spanish, the occasional burst of automatic gunfire from what he hoped were training exercises rather than executions. When Pablo Escobar finally entered, Russo was surprised by how normal he looked. Average height, slightly overweight, wearing a simple white shirt, his thick mustache was neatly trimmed, but the eyes gave him away. Cold, intelligent, calculating, and completely without mercy. "Señor Russo," Pablo said in heavily accented English, "I understand you have something that belongs to me." "If you mean your man's life," Russo replied, "he tried to kill me first." Pablo nodded slowly. "That man was my wife's nephew. A talented young man, very loyal. Very dead because of you. It was self-defense." Pablo walked over to a bookshelf and pulled down a well-worn copy of The Making of the Godfather. "I am a great admirer of cinema. Señor Russo, your performance as Carlo Rizzi was quite memorable. The betrayal, the consequences, very authentic." Pablo closed the book and fixed Russo with a penetrating stare. "But I find myself curious. Are you here as Gianni Russo, the actor, seeking to resolve a personal conflict? Or are you here as Gianni Russo, the messenger, carrying proposals from more powerful men? I'm not sure I understand." "The difference is whether we are discussing compensation for one dead employee or much larger business opportunities." Pablo leaned forward. "Your friend John Gotti didn't send you here to die, Señor Russo. He sent you here to negotiate." The words hit Russo like a physical blow. For 2 weeks he had been convinced that Gotti was sacrificing him out of personal animosity. "What are you talking about?" Pablo studied him carefully. Then suddenly his expression shifted. "Wait," he said, his voice filled with genuine surprise. "Why didn't you tell me you were Carlo in The Godfather? That's my favorite movie." Russo stared at him, hardly believing what he was hearing. "I thought I was hallucinating," he would later recall. "What are you talking about?" "Señor Gotti has a proposal for me. A very interesting proposal about cocaine distribution in New York City. But such proposals cannot be made through normal channels. Too many federal agents watching, so instead, he sends an actor, someone who has legitimate reasons to travel, who doesn't appear on any law enforcement radar." Pablo moved to the window. "Do you know why I agreed to meet with you instead of simply having you killed at the airport?" Russo shook his head. "Because John Gotti is the first Italian-American crime boss who has ever approached me with respect. Not demands, not threats, respect. He sent me his personal enemy as a gesture of good faith." "I'm not important to him," Russo said quietly. "Aren't you?" Pablo smiled. "You made him famous, Señor Russo. Without The Godfather, without you playing Carlo Rizzi, the whole world would not know about the Italian mafia. In his way, John Gotti owes his celebrity to you." The conversation continued for 4 hours. Pablo explained that he had been looking for a reliable distribution partner in New York for months. The Puerto Rican organizations were unreliable. The black gangs were unpredictable, but the Italian families had discipline, organization, and political connections. Pablo outlined a partnership structure. Monthly cocaine shipments would arrive in New York Harbor, hidden in legitimate cargo containers. The Gambino organization would handle northeastern distribution using their established networks. Money would be laundered through Italian restaurants and construction companies. But this partnership requires absolute trust, Pablo emphasized. I need to know that your people can handle pressure from federal investigators without breaking, that they understand operational security. Before concluding their business discussion, Pablo made an unexpected request. There is one more thing, Senor Russo. I want you to perform the final scene from The Godfather. The one where Michael confronts Carlo about Sonny's murder. Russo thought he was about to be executed, that this was some elaborate psychological torture, but Pablo's eyes showed genuine excitement, like a fan meeting his favorite actor. He knew the entire scene by heart, Russo would later recall. Line for line. He played Michael Corleone, while I repeated my Carlo Rizzi dialogue. I thought I was dead, but he was just enjoying himself. When the impromptu performance ended, Pablo's demeanor shifted to one of genuine respect. You have amazing courage, flying down to Bogota, not knowing if you would return, Pablo said. Most men in your situation would have run and hidden, but you faced the problem like a man. This I admire. As their meeting concluded, Pablo handed Russo a heavy leather briefcase, a gift for Senor Gotti. To demonstrate my appreciation for his diplomatic approach and to provide the technical details necessary for our cooperation. 3 days later, Russo walked back into the Ravenite Club, carrying the briefcase. Gotti stood up when he saw him approaching, a sign of respect that didn't go unnoticed by the assembled wise guys. Tommy, how was your vacation in South America? Russo set the briefcase down on the table. Gotti opened it carefully. Inside were photographs of cocaine laboratories, shipping manifests, contact information for corrupt officials, financial documents outlining money laundering procedures, and a handwritten letter from Pablo expressing his interest in cooperation. Interesting reading material, Gotti said. Pablo's got quite an operation. You knew, Russo said, finally understanding the full scope of what had been orchestrated. You knew he wouldn't kill me. You knew this was a business meeting. Gotti leaned back in his chair, genuine respect in his eyes for the first time in 30 years. Tommy, sometimes the best way to open a door is to send someone through it who doesn't know it's unlocked. You used me. I saved your life and opened up the biggest opportunity the Gambino family has seen since Prohibition. Gotti gestured to the briefcase. Pablo Escobar wants to do business with us. You planned this from the beginning. I planned for the possibility. Gotti corrected. I couldn't know Pablo would be interested, but I knew that if anyone could convince him we were serious about respectful business, it would be someone who had risked his life for a face-to-face meeting. And if he had killed me, then I would have known the Colombians weren't interested in cooperation. Gotti's voice was matter-of-fact. But that didn't happen. Instead, we now have a direct line to the biggest drug operation in South America. Over the following 18 months, the partnership that began with Russo's desperate flight to Colombia generated over $50 million in profits for the Gambino family, transforming it from a traditional neighborhood crime organization into a sophisticated international operation. Cocaine shipments arrived in New York Harbor with clockwork regularity, hidden in containers carrying legitimate exports of Colombian coffee, flowers, and handicrafts. The arrangement worked so smoothly that other crime families began attempting to establish their own relationships with Colombian suppliers. But they discovered that Pablo Escobar was not interested in expanding his American partnerships. He had found reliable associates in New York, and maintaining exclusive relationships was more valuable to him than maximizing short-term profits. The success of the Colombian connection also fundamentally transformed John Gotti's position within the Gambino family hierarchy. His ability to negotiate such a profitable international partnership demonstrated strategic vision that far exceeded traditional organized crime thinking. The federal investigation that eventually brought down John Gotti never uncovered the full extent of his Colombian connections. By the time law enforcement understood the scope of the operations, Pablo Escobar was dead, and the network had been dismantled. To this day, Russo maintains that Gotti saved his life by arranging that meeting. What he rarely mentions is that Gotti used that situation to transform the Gambino family into the most profitable criminal organization in American history. It was a masterclass in strategic thinking, conducted by a man who understood that success belongs to those who can turn desperate situations into opportunities. Gotti's jealousy of Russo's Godfather fame had been well documented over the years, but according to whispers from those close to Russo, he would tell a different story to friends in private. "Johnny was always the smartest kid on the block. I just never realized how smart, until he convinced me to volunteer for a suicide mission that was actually the foundation of a drug empire." Whether those words were ever truly spoken, or simply the reflection of an old man's respect for a criminal mastermind, only those who were there that night in Las Vegas really know. If this story of betrayal, survival, and the mastermind move that built a drug empire captivated you, hit that subscribe button. We're uncovering the John Gotti strategies that law enforcement never understood. The chess moves behind the chaos. The brilliant plans disguised as simple favors. Drop a like if you see how one desperate actor became the key to millions in cartel money. More untold Gotti masterpieces coming next. Don't miss the criminal genius who turned enemies into assets and disasters into dynasties.